Welcome to this edition of Sovereign Nation TV. I'm John Matthews.
And I'm Joe Panzarello.
In this edition, we want to discuss the most divisive issue facing America today. How do we know it's the most divisive? From 1861 to 1864, our republic fought an internal war that threatened to forever divide its citizens against each other along racial, family, and cultural lines. Had that war succeeded in its intent, the Great Experiment, as it's referred to by historians today, would have ceased to exist, and we would be looking at a very different world today. The issue I'm talking about is systematic racism. Today, we are quickly seeing the old adage, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, play out once again before our very eyes. The difference being this time, those seeking to divide our nation along ideological and theological lines are not doing so to save the economy, as was the case in the Civil War, but to seize our system of government and economics for their own personal gain. They are actively working to destroy our republic from within and replace it with a tyrannical oligarchy. This time, there is no color barrier other than the color green. There are no theological restraints in play, but a conscious effort to dismiss He who bestowed upon us unalienable rights, and in his place elevate man as the righteous sovereign. Among all the psychobabble currently utilizing identity politics for power and profit is a seemingly innocent article that I believe so well illustrates the current state of affairs in America on the imaginary issue of systematic racism. This article can be found toward the bottom of the YouTube homepage search engine. And I say imaginary for a very specific reason that you will soon understand. The article is headlined, President Obama's Summer Playlist has a very specific order. The article states that in order to appreciate Obama's mix of current and vintage music, one must listen to it in the exact order it is listed. One wonders what the intent of such seemingly harmless instruction might be when placed in context of the rehashed racist narrative that continues to publicize its own satanical playlist in the form of deconstructed narratives. Does failure to listen in the exact order listed imply one cannot appreciate or understand the mindset of America's first half-white president, thus causing the listener to remain derelict in the knowledge of all things good? If one was to say, listen to the playlist in reverse, would one find him or herself scrawling helter-skelter in blood across their rear windows on their way to the next Trump rally? Would listening to the playlist in random order deprive the listener of Obama's messianic attributes, and thus forever exile them to the decrepit depths of poverty nurtured by social injustice? But one can only speculate. But what is even more telling than the divine decree to listen to Obama's summer playlist in the exact order listed is the little disclaimer underneath the article. Beneath the bold headlines and the fancy video, we find these words in a small, light font. Our goal, meaning Yahoo, is to create a safe and engaging place for users to connect over interests and passions. In order to improve our community experience, we are temporarily suspending article commenting. And there it is. In just a few short paragraphs underneath a 1:40 propaganda video, we find the solution to every problem that permeates our racist, bigoted, homophobic society. One simply needs to be inspired by Barack Hussein Obama's music listening choices, followed by remaining silent about any response one might have when listening. To be more definitive, we find here how those who exploit racism for power and profit now expect anyone and everyone to respond to the racist narrative that by the hour further divides America along racial, sexual, cultural, and socioeconomic lines. That narrative is that systematic racism is alive and well in America. The narrative reads this way: systematic racism is the disease. White privilege is the symptom. The only cure is the eradication of white privilege. In order to achieve a racist-free society, we must all be vaccinated through injections of social justice mandates. The only problem is to hear those regurgitate the systematic racism narrative across academic, political, and media venues are actually the ones perpetrating the very tenets they claim to abhor. The question then becomes why? So let's look at systematic racism. First, advocates of social justice keep telling us systematic racism is incurable. Why is this so? It's because, as the echo chamber resonates, systematic racism is inherent to one's skin color. If you are white, you can't be cured of racism. It's in your blood the same way DNA determines your sex, skin, hair, and eye color. It's in your blood the same way hereditary disease can eventually take your life. You can try to cure the disease with treatments, but we all know that for the most part, such treatments only delay the inevitable. Such it is with white privilege. It's incurable. White people are destined to be racist. They can't help it, and they can't prevent it. Louis Farrakhan has stated many times over his hate-filled career that white people are blue-eyed devils created 6,000 years ago by a scientist named Jacob. One day the giant wheel in space will rain down fire and destroy all the Yipo. James Cone, creator of Black liberation theology and mentor to Pastor Jeremiah Wright, of whom Barack Obama called his mentor, claims Jesus was black and came to eradicate poverty and racism. According to Cone, one of the tasks of BLT is to analyze the nature of the gospel of Jesus Christ in light of the experience of oppressed blacks. Christian theology, as Cone sees it, is to be interpreted in terms of systematic and structural relationships between two main groups: the victims, or the oppressed, and the victimizers, the oppressors. Based on this presupposition, Cone contends the great accomplishment of Christ's life and death was freeing African Americans from the centuries-old tyranny of white racism and white oppression. Never mind there were no African Americans when Jesus walked among the Jews and Gentiles in Jerusalem, or the fact that Jesus was Jewish, not black. But we need not be concerned in regard to fact. In the mind of the race-baiting advocate, the end justifies the means. Fiction becomes as real as fact. The truth is, if we delve deeper into the theologies of those like Cone and Farrakhan, we discover a belief system that employs the idea of skin color as simply a means to an end. Racism is not actually about the color of one's skin. James Cone states as much when he clarifies that white oppression is universal against all people not Caucasian. He also states truth is not objective but subjective, circumstantial in nature, and experiential in application. In other words, systematic racism is based on perception held by the person or persons that live within the system. In line with that perspective, Farrakhan negates his own narrative, whites are blue-eyed devils, by recently mandating his organization take up Scientology doctrine written by L. Ron Hubbard, a white man who also believes Earth was populated by extraterrestrial beings, bad Thetans banished to Earth as sort of punishment. On the other hand, there are those who adhere to the orthodox belief systematic racism was intentionally designed to ensure all persons of non-white hereditary would never attain power and or hold wealth of any significance. Nikki Lisa Cole writes in an article published at ThoughtCo in July of 2020 an expose on sociologist Joe Fagan, author of the book Racist America: Roots, Current Realities, and Future Reparations. Written in the year 2000, Fagan attempts to place the concept of systematic racism in more contemporary context. He is credited by academics today as a key source that has established the repackaged racist narrative in America. Fagan's theory contends racism is in fact built into the foundation of the U.S. society, and that it has over time come to infuse all aspects of it. He states in his book, systematic racism includes the complex array of anti-black practices, the unjustly gained political economic power of whites, the continuing economic and other resource inequalities along racial lines, and the white racist ideologies and attitudes created to maintain and rationalize white privilege and power. To his credit, Fagan does not adhere to the doctrine of those like Farrakhan, who believes racism cannot be eradicated willfully, but must be eradicated by force, preferably genocide. Nor does he hold in Cohn's belief racism is here to stay, and blacks in particular must therefore simply create their own world. Fagan states that since racism is everywhere, it must be resisted everywhere, and that we must endeavor to eradicate it as humanity. Okay then, let's get to work. Perhaps we should start by looking at those systematic elements that fuel racism. How about family? There was a day in this country when the nuclear family infrastructure was held in high regard in the black community. Within the family was taught that if one worked hard, one could achieve great things in spite of any racial or cultural obstacles in one's path. The vast majority of blacks and Americans were Republican. The stable marriage rate among blacks was the highest in the country. They were more religious than any other demographic. This has all been well documented. Enter LBJ's New Deal, and all of a sudden the nuclear family in the black community becomes an exception rather than the rule. The welfare state replaces the father in the home. The fathers, devoid of purpose and respect, end up incarcerated because crime fills the void lack of purpose creates. So the welfare state, created by the likes of FDR and LBJ, brings the black community back to the plantation. They changed their party affiliation and became willful slaves to the increasing alliance of greedy politicians of both black and white heritage. How about education? Education among blacks was dogmatic in its doctrine that education can elevate one to a place of success far beyond unfavorable circumstances. But it has changed from learning the skills that helps one to fulfill one's purpose and destiny to indoctrination that teaches your skin color will keep you from ever achieving anything. This too has once again enslaved blacks to the population. The New Deal was in fact the means by which the Democrat Party undermined the Civil Rights Act. As LBJ so aptly stated when he signed the Civil Rights Act, blacks will vote for us for the next 250 years. The question then becomes simple. Who is in charge of these institutions? The answer is just as simple. The Democrat Party, the plantation owners. If you want to identify the enemies of minorities, look no further than the ballot in front of you. It validates what I'm saying. It confirms history. And it proves that racism is simply a belief system held in practice by those who adhere to its tenets, whether it be to overcome low self-esteem or on a bigger scale for power and profit. Back to Yahoo. As Yahoo stated in their disclaimer to Obama's summer playlist, all we have to do to make it all work is temporarily suspend commenting so that we can improve our community experience. We'll be right back here on Sovereign Nation TV. Stay with us.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence proclaims God-given rights, and we intend to protect them. Working with people like you for over 50 years, preserving freedom and building a better tomorrow. Safeguarding the Constitution by limiting government power. We are restoring liberties, educating voters, and leading the freedom movement.
Independence starts with you and I working together as a team. With our affiliates and your support, we reach in excess of 1 million unique individuals like yourself every month. This website is the catalyst, and you are the energy we need to make a change. On jbs.org, we store a sizable variety of tools designed to get you started. I invite you to consider taking part in turning the tide for freedom, not just for one, but for all. Not just for today, but for years to come. We, the John Birch Society, stand to defend the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. What do you stand for?
Well, welcome back to this edition of Sovereign Nation TV. I'm John Matthews,
And I'm Joe Panzarello.
We have with us today a gentleman I met just a couple weeks ago, maybe a few weeks ago, and I was just totally impressed with his presentation, his presence, just his whole, the word I'm using is the spirit of what he was talking about. And it falls in line so much with a concept that I've been thinking about here over the last few weeks, and that is the idea or the belief or the need to some degree, re-educate Americans as to what it means to be an American and the rights that we have, the sovereignty that belongs within us, within the context of the unalienable rights that have been given to us by a creator. And it seems to me that a lot of the problems that we have today in America is simply because people don't know what they don't know. And I myself have been enlightened over the last few weeks in several areas. And it just got me to thinking that maybe we need to talk a little bit more about some of the things that nobody ever talks about or has ever talked about. Some of these concepts I remember back in my civics class never even discussing this kind of stuff. So it's kind of a relearning process in some cases, or maybe learning for the first time for others. So I've asked Mikel Miller to come on and talk to us and discuss with us some of these concepts that he seems very well informed as to what they mean. And I know, Mikel, you had mentioned to me the idea that what you do when you go out and speak to people is that you want to educate them in terms of sovereignty, the idea of the concept of sovereignty. So welcome thank you for coming on. And
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you on with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It is truly an honor to be here and be on your show. As I always do, I always start out by just acknowledging that I'm a servant of the kingdom of heaven. My Lord and Savior is Jesus Christ, and I serve God, the King, the great I am, and everything that comes through me is supported by the Father upstairs. So I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that. And
I probably wouldn't have asked you on if you hadn't.
In these days and time, it's important because the Christian family is now standing up boldly to proclaim in the midst of any type of tyranny, in the midst of any type of humanity interruption. There are children of God all around the country, all around the world that are standing up and proclaiming openly, praying openly, acknowledging openly that God is King. And his name is Jesus, just to make sure that we understand who we're talking about.
I got you, right. I mean, you know, we talk about the unalienable rights given us by a creator. And it seems like in the minds of many people today, that creator is some abstract rather than something that's just an actual being or tangible type of thing, you know, kind of like, you know, let the force be with you kind of stuff. So I think it's very important that, you know, one of the things we endeavor to do on the show is restore the belief that we are one nation under God. Under God. And without God, we're not pretty much anything worth having. You know, we can see that when we look around the world. You know, those nations that do not honor the God that we honor, you can just tell by their economical situations, the level of tyranny in their country, the suppression and oppression and genocide in some cases that take place. We had Dr. Wen Chen on here a few weeks ago who talked about the fact that one specific demographic in their country was being basically murdered because they didn't line up with the paradigm and the theological beliefs of that nation. So I'm definitely all for that. Now you would talk to you wanted to talk about, or I wanted to ask you to talk about this concept of the sovereignty. When we talk about sovereignty, and I think sometimes people might look at that word and think of it in terms of just a religious concept when we talk about a sovereign God. And we look at people in the government today, and they are trying to establish themselves as the sovereign God kind of thing. Can you give us some enlightenment on what you talk about when you talk about sovereignty?
Yes, I think how I want to start this is that there are a number of patriots around the country that are standing up for the rights of the people. And they have a right to, and they deserve to do that. In this effort of trying to make change, we first have to understand first where our power lies. okay? And I say that because our forefathers knew way back when that the actual sovereignty is you, your person. You are your own person, you're your own property, you are everything. And so when we speak about sovereignty, it's not as a group, which as we're talking about a group or government trying to control, it's actually the individual. Okay, right. And as long as the individual understands that they themselves have the sovereignty over themselves, they have the sovereignty over their children, and then the collective unit, the collective people, I don't even want to say citizen anymore, because the 16th Amendment, I believe, kind of is where the word citizen comes from. You understand what I mean? But that word citizen is under the initiation of what we call the de facto system. So when I go out to speak to people, I say that the body of Christ is full of all types of needs and experiences and things that people need to do. So there's a place for someone fighting for education. There's a place for someone fighting for homeless. There's a place for all of that. So I don't ever touch on that because that's needed. But what I try to do when I speak with groups is to educate people the basic principle. Is that if you understand as an individual that you have the sovereignty just for yourself, that no one can actually take that from you. So if we can connect ourselves to the sovereignty, then we're able to exert that sovereignty outwards with the understanding for ourselves. So when I speak, I try to share that our forefathers prepared and staked this country first on the principles of God and God's law. In our Constitution, in our Declaration of Independence, it talks about the laws of nature and nature's God. A lot of people, including myself, because remember, since I've been born, it's been a particular way. So I try to ask the people, one, to be patient with yourself in the re-education of what the sovereignty of this country means to you as an individual, so that you can be effective in regards to how you present and how you address the grievances that affect your sovereignty. So one person sovereignty connected to another one person sovereignty, another one person sovereignty is the sovereignty of the body itself in Christ. So I try to take the time to just inform people that of one, we the people are at the top. The one person above us is God. Right. And God's law. That's the only thing above us. What has occurred over the years, at no fault to us, we are a recipient of the change to what the enemy has done to this country, is that we have been denied the understanding of the sovereignty. But the enemy knows the value of that.
Absolutely. Right. I was just thinking, what you're saying here is just so much echoes some of the conversations I've had with people over the past few months. Yeah. Is that when people start talking to me about things about, what is, for instance, a real simple stuff. What is the difference between a Republican and a Democrat? Because many people today can't see a difference. And I'm just saying, well, if you look at the ideological foundation of our republic, and that is that value is placed on the individual. Yeah. Okay, and the individual is accountable to God. Yeah. So then if you're responsible and you're accountable to God, then collectively we become a force. Yes. And I'm hoping that echoes what you were just saying.
No, it is. It is. But when people, because we're used to the classes and the identification of groups, whether it be Democrat or Republican, we tend to put more stake into the groups. You understand what I mean? So in today's climate, we find out that, hey, there are some Republicans who are not upholding the constitutional oath. So then people get lost and confused in that regard because they're looking outwards to someone in the system, which is our governmental system, okay, which is like the fourth tier, the third tier in our sovereignty as the force. You understand? When actually it's not that. The force is you yourself, and understanding your rights and understanding that you have unalienable rights, not inalienable rights. And I bring that up because in the process of what is occurring across the country, there are people that are beginning to settle the states. Settling the states in its true form of how our forefathers actually set the country up. Okay, not ratify, settle. Okay, and to complete the settled process of settling your state, you first got to understand your individual power.
Right.
Okay, don't look out to someone else. Look within yourself and know what is your life, what is your liberty, and what is your pursuit of happiness. And when you start there, then you are able to spread your spirit out of your sovereignty that is infectious to someone else to understand, the next person to understand, and then collectively we have the power to express our grievances to anybody, to anyone, even person to person. You understand what I mean? Person to person. So even with that statement, we find ourselves going somewhere else to address the infringement on our sovereignty that's between neighbor to neighbor. When I should just be able to say to you, hey, look, you're infringing on my sovereignty.
Right.
And if we can continue to speak that way, we'll continue to go in the direction of what our forefathers said this country is built on, and that's self-governance. So how can we self-governance if we don't understand individually what our sovereignty is? So all of it's a process. It's new for everyone.
Right.
Okay, so we got to be patient with the process. However, for those of us who truly wants to operate as having the individual power of executing their rights that they have for themselves and their family, we're able to move forward to being able to make the necessary change we need to make in our country.
When we talk about this, because what it really does come down to, you just made the statement that people get confused.
Yes.
And they get confused because they don't understand who they are within the system. And we're now in an age where the system seems to be the gauge by which everybody measures what's going on, rather than the individual himself, who should be a reflection of that system, rather than the system becoming a reflection of them.
Yes.
And so when we talk about, what I sense amongst people today is the fact that what happens is, because of this confusion, they kind of get like, they do one of two things. They freeze like a deer in the headlights, and they don't know what to do. Or they overreact and let their emotions take over, and everything just becomes even more chaotic. You know, that's why we have things like, you know, we can burn down Seattle, but we can't march on Washington, D.C. It's an insurrection over here. It's a protest over here. And people, you know, I get people all the time say to me, well, how do they do that? How do they do that? Well, they deconstruct the language.
Yes.
That's really what it's all about. And in line with that, because I just want to shift just a little bit.
Sure.
You had talked, when I heard you talk, which really took me by surprise and also got me very excited, was the idea that we have within each respective county sheriffs.
Yes.
And that sheriffs are not answerable. They don't answer to anybody but the people that elected them.
Yes.
And I remembered as soon as you said that, it triggered in my mind. I wonder why, like the sheriff down in Orange County and the one in San Bernardino, and they refused to enforce all the lockdowns. I said, how did they get away with that? and when you brought that up, I said, that's how they got away. The governor couldn't stop them from doing what they're doing. Can you explain to our listeners that idea or that fact?
Sure. The understanding is this. We the people, we have rights, but we need someone to enforce our rights. Okay, which is the sheriff office. Now, the government was established by our forefathers for the purpose of just securing our rights. Okay, that was the process with our forefathers, was to have the government to secure the rights for the entire nation, okay, and operate as such. However, because of the system, the de facto system that's been in operation since 1800s, okay, we have lost sight by the way that the language has been changed over time to confuse us on understanding what the process is. Now, in the de jure system, and the de jure system is the system of the First Amendment all the way to the 13th Amendment. That is the de jure system, and that is the system that we are returning this country back to. Okay, under the de jure system, the sheriff is held accountable by the people, not by the government officials. Now, how did we get to what you mentioned in regards to the sheriffs operating on behalf of the system? And that happened because there's a speaker that brought up, his name is Martin Red Beckman. And I encourage all of the viewers all out there to just look up Martin Red Beckman. He talks about God's law. He talks about how the system is set up. He addresses these things for us to understand. And he mentions in there two things. He has God's law, then he has the law of common sense, he mentions, and then he mentions the law of common grammar. And I thought that was interesting, because in the time that I spoke that I spoke to the group that you were there, I brought up the topic of the difference between sheriff department.
Right, I remember that, yes.
Versus sheriff office. Okay, the department, when you look it up, lends that if you read the word sheriff department anywhere, it says that any person operating in that space is held accountable to the officials that are above that particular person. So they are accountable to the system itself. When you look up the word sheriff office, which are the people elects the sheriff is held accountable to observing the constitutional oath for the people, for the actual people. And even in that day I was speaking, we had a conversation with a young patriot talking about the department is there, it's in the executive branch, and the sheriff always...
Yeah, that never happened. I remember that guy. Yeah. And I actually turned around and looked at him and said, yeah, now you're talking like a Republican.
But when people bring up those types of personal view or understanding, let's not say personal view, let's say understanding, we have to be patient with them. Okay, and I think that's the biggest thing that God's people want, who are actively and honestly working on behalf of the kingdom and for this nation as a republic, is we got to be patient to the fact that the indoctrination runs deep in everybody according to how much they've received for themselves. So I just reiterate that the sheriff office is the key term that we need to look for, because the sheriff office is the person you go to execute your grievance against a public servant once you've already submitted your grievance upon your First Amendment to that public servant.
Very interesting.
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yes, yes. So when we see in our videos that shop around on all the Patriot channels, and we see, especially here in LA, and we see the police and the sheriff force vaccinating our disabled kids, which I took to be a very sad situation, you understand they are a department.
Right. All right. That's not the sheriff's
That's
office.
not the sheriff office.
It's the sheriff's department, which are probably accountable to either the board of supervisors
Yes.
or city council.
All the way up to the top.
Okay.
All the way up to the top. Yeah.
All right. All right. So we have with us Mikel Miller, and I can't really attach him to anything, which is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to have somebody on the show. Well, you know, because in this day and age, they like to label us. They like to put us in a little box, and that way we can be compartmentalized and taken off the shelf when we needed to be and stuff like that. I do want to just take a couple moments, because we're coming up to the end of our time. We are talking today in the show, in a monologue that I did, the opening in the show, on systematic racism.
Yeah.
And I am so inspired by the fact that I am hearing more and more people come out about this and say, you know what, the idea that systematic racism doesn't seem in their minds to be a tangible thing, but rather an abstract idea of sorts, where, if I can say, it's based on your perception of how the system operates rather than how the system actually operates. And that's not to take away from the fact that in this country we have had to deal with racism. We're still dealing with racism, but I've seen it evolve across the board, where it's not really just white people against black people.
Right.
We have black people against white people, and in some cases it's black people against other black people.
Yep.
If you're a conservative black man, then in the eyes of somebody like Don Lemon, you know, you're a, what do they call him, a race traitor, or something like that. You know, so you're an Uncle Tom. You know, that kind of thing. And so I'm just wanted to take a few moments, if I could, and get you to maybe expound about your concept of what the narrative
Yeah.
about systematic racism.
Yeah.
How do you take that?
Well, my opinion, and to me, the systematic racism is part of the agenda to add the division and keep the division going. Okay, we all know that we are different people. We all know that we're different colors. We're different classes in regards to if you're wealthy or not. We all understand that. But once the de facto system has gained its hooks into the people, one of the ways to continue the train of division is injecting different types of systematic systems within the de facto system to help prevent you from assembling and coming together as a unity. You understand? So they play on the part of creating this narrative that one group is better than the other group, that one group is worse than the other group, that one group is dangerous, one group is this, one group is that. So, for example, I'll use this. Now, I've never been to Africa, but every time I've seen something that's in relation to Africa, and I'm using this as a very strong point, is that I've only seen parts of Africa that has been projected to support the fact that it's not a place that you will want to visit because of all of the shortages of food and all the humanitarian things, all of the illnesses. But in all actuality, when you get a chance to visit and you go to a place in Africa, you end up going to a place or a city that is just as alive like Beverly Hills. Just as alive as any city in America, but you're not presented with that particular image for you to be able to differentiate on your own what you would like to believe.
Sure.
And that's part of systematic racism to me, is that they project, they plant the seeds of what they want you to think something is, versus giving you the chance to experience the truth of what something is. Another example, we spoke to you. I could have come away with an opinion I could have heard an opinion about you. And some people would take that opinion and run with it without really getting a chance to meet Mr. Matthews and say, no, that's not Mr. Matthews. Right. You understand? Actually, we kind of have synergy on a number of topics. Right. So when you prevent the people from having the opportunity to discern for themselves, then you're creating a lane for them that they may, from habit and years of watching media, believe the direction that is being presented, versus giving the opportunity to meet you, communicate with you, exchange ideas, and then realize that, hey, look, we are similar. Yes, we disagree on certain things, and God says you're not going to agree with one person on every topic. That's what makes us different. Right. That's what truly makes us different. But let's give each other the opportunity to just, discern for ourselves what really a person is, and not rely on what we hear through our ears from another person who is not the actual person they're talking about, or the image that is presented by someone who is not that actual person. Right. So, yeah.
I think the most. Yeah. You want to say something?
Weren't we talking about the power of influence
earlier?
Right. Absolutely. And Mikel just said it and mentioned discernment and how vital that is these days, and how uncommon it's become.
Oh, how lacking it is.
Yes.
I like discernment. We talk about discernment here just for a second. The thing that's really gotten me, the dirty secret that's out there right now, is that all these little sub-narratives that are feeding into the big narrative are all being perpetrated by the very people that are claiming to be the champions for all these issues. If we say, okay, well, we have to teach critical race theory in the school because white history rules everything or dominates everything, but the idea of saying, okay, the concept behind it is to actually further, if I can use the word, further enslave minorities by believing that you've been conditioned to be a loser because the white people are in power, rather than just, I'm of the belief that we've had some bad stuff happen, and yes, white America has been the source of some of that stuff, but look where we're at now compared to where we were then, And I think if you were to weigh things out today, you would find that, you know, the only people that are really looking at things through a colored filter are the wingnuts.
Yeah.
You know, and it's on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking earlier about Farrakhan, who thinks, okay, white people should be killed.
Yeah.
You know, and then we talk about the neo-Nazis or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, all black people should be killed,
Yeah.
okay, that kind of thing. Well, those are the fringe elements, and they're the minority.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of humanity is pretty much,
Yeah.
you are who you are, I am who I am.
Yeah.
You know, that's what natural law means
Yes.
to me.
Yeah.
What we inherently know
Mhm.
to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just apply it within the terms and conditions that God sets forth in His Word.
Yep.
And that's how we remain accountable to that source. So, yeah, anyway, we're at the end of our time here. This is Mikel Miller. I'm just going to say a fellow brother in the fight, man. We're heading in the same direction. I know when I heard you, I just immediately felt a connection.
Yeah.
I'm like, this guy, we're on the same page. He's going in a little different direction, but he's going a different route, but we're going in the same direction.
Yes.
Kind of thing. I want to give you a few moments to promote anything that you want to promote, whatever
Sure.
you're doing and whatever.
Sure.
So you got a few moments here to
Thank
talk
you.
to the camera.
Thank
Let
you.
them know what you want them to
Thank
know.
you. First of all, I want to say thank you guys for having me on the show, and we need to continue to support podcasts, bloggers, muckrakers who are standing for what truth is. When our President Trump, okay, we identify him as the 45th president, which is our current de facto thing. But when he comes back and the republic is established, he will be our 19th president. So what I want to say is I would encourage people to start educating yourself on the amendments 1 through 13. Those are the de jure systems that we are re-establishing. It was established, but we are re-establishing through education. Okay, any amendment after 13 is part of the de facto system. So even for California's original constitution in 1849, visit that, or visit your original constitution in your state. In addition to that, I would encourage people to start creating their groups in their cities, and also start looking at what we call the national-assembly.net website. And that the national-assembly.net website is the site where you can get critical information in regards to what the First Amendment really was written for. Yes, we can assemble to protest, yes, we can assemble the grievances, but it's also to assemble to be able to make effective changes according to the original Constitution.
And is this I'm going to add, lack of a better word here, a collaboration of what we would call the state assemblies?
I would say this to you. This is a culmination of what the republic is going to be.
Okay.
And I hate to deny or say anything to what you mentioned. I'm saying to you, the education part of that, the individuals start to understand what our state assemblies stand for. So in order to properly educate, you got to see the other side. Right. And when we became awoke or awakened, we understand that we were taught to challenge our things that we see and hear. That was what this whole movement was about. Challenge what you hear, challenge what you see, challenge what is written. Right. So I don't want to say no to what you mentioned.
You know what's so funny about that, Michael, is that when I talked to Nancy Kramer with the state assembly, right, California assembly, she gave me the same answer. I was like, you need to be definitive with me. She goes, I know, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
You need to find out.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Thank you.
Anyway,
yeah.
we once again just thank you very
Sure.
much, Michael, for coming on.
Sure.
And just stay with us. We'll be right back
Yep.
here on Sovereign Nation TV. Don't go away.
Yep.
Being a modern digital marketer is demanding. You work hard to maximize the visibility of your clients. If you had all your data in one place, you could analyze performance at a glance, and your job would be a lot easier. That's why we built Bright Local. We create a location dashboard for every client you manage and aggregate critical local SEO data, such as search rankings, local business listings, Google My Business, customer reviews, and social interactions. It's why over 3,000 SEO professionals trust us. Start today with a fully featured 14-day trial. Bright Local, making local SEO simple.
Well, welcome back to Sovereign Nation TV. I'm John Matthews.
And I'm Joe Panzarello.
And we're glad to be back with you. We've been talking about systematic racism today over the course of the monologue and the interview that we just had with Mikel Miller. We touched on it, I think, very briefly. I just thought that interview with him was just fascinating. I mean, there's so much more to learn from this guy.
I agree.
Just dynamic. But getting back to the topic at hand at this point, the idea of systematic racism as a narrative or a concept, somewhat abstract actually, rather than actually something that I think is tangible, that can be identified and supported by real evidence, empirical evidence kind of thing. There is no denying, as we were talking in the interview with Mikel, there is no denying that America has some really dark spots, places in history when it comes to oppressing particularly people of color. But you know, one of the things I always relate to when we talk about slavery, which is the buzzword, you know, when you talk about people that are what I call true believers about the idea of systematic racism, is the idea that the enslavement of people of color has never really been truly removed from the American ideal, that the system still operates in such a way as to keep those people in their place, you know, on the plantation, either symbolically or literally. And I just kind of, in a way, relate to it. I like to take things like this sometimes to make it personal. I'm Irish, 100% Irish, third generation Irish, right? My parents, my great-great-grandparents immigrated over here. On my mom's side. My father's side, Irish, was over here during the Civil War, actually, to that degree. And we know that in those days, in the days of Civil War, that it wasn't just the blacks that were enslaved. Irish were enslaved. Chinese were enslaved. There were other cultures and races that weren't seen as first-class citizens. And I think it wasn't until after the Civil War that the Irish even were allowed to vote, if my history is right. Now, certainly at that point in time, somebody should have said, well, if we're going to give the right to vote to the Irish, let's give it to the blacks, let's give it to the Chinese, all these other groups that were at that time considered second-class citizens, or in the case, property to be sold and exchanged. But, I mean, if we look at where we were at then and we look at where we're at now, I don't understand how anybody can look at that, at the empirical evidence between that time and now, and think that we're still back in the days of, Jim Crow. I think that's a phrase I hear a lot. You know, what do you think, Joe?
I mean, it's a very personal thing to be able to talk about, John, obviously. You know, people's backgrounds, the skin color, their ethnicity, it's a very personal thing, all right? But, you know, you're talking about things that are way back in the past, but what has changed with regards to modern day situation is who are the plantation owners? And you alluded to that in your monologue about the modern day DNC, the Democrat Party, being the present day plantation owners. And don't forget, you know, we talk about the issue of systemic racism with regards to what came out of the Black Lives Matter protests and the shootings and the accusations against the police departments about systemic racism. But even before that, John, 3 to 4 years ago, there was the issue surrounding the walkaway movement, if you'll recall that. All of a sudden, because of somebody like Brandon, I think his last name was Strachey, Brandon Strachey, and he came out with his 6-minute video that basically turned the country on its head, because he spoke out against the victimization part of all these demographics of people, and they were sick and tired of being called a Democrat and being told that they were kept down, they were discriminated against, they were oppressed, when it was a big lie. And that was what was behind the walk-away movement, about walking away from the Democrat Party. And after Brandon created his video, there were thousands of other people from minority backgrounds that were creating their videos and posting them on YouTube, basically referring to the Democrat Party as the plantation.
Right. Well, if we think, you know, what I go back to was the time back, it was several years ago, maybe a decade or more ago, when we were, Rush Limbaugh was trying to become the owner of, a part owner of one of a football franchise. It may have been the New Orleans Saints.
Okay.
He was being considered to buy into a football franchise. And that ignited this massive movement with the people like Al Sharpton and everything, that this man being a racist and every conservative and all this bad with America, that would be actually dictating policy to black football players, you know, that kind of thing. And my mind, when I heard all this, I immediately processed it this way. But isn't the NFL just a plantation? Isn't the Major League Baseball become a plantation? The NBA has become a plantation? Because what you've got is you're bringing, I mean, there's no other way of putting it. In most cases, you're bringing athletes out of low-income communities.
Right.
And you're exploiting their ability and paying them millions of dollars to do something that kids do for free.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
And then, because you're making the owners so much money, you can now leverage an opinion and be taken because of the fact that you're actually working for a master, and you're making that master a lot. The only difference is you're getting paid a hunk of money too, you know?
Yes.
But the idea that we can attach intelligence to being an athlete, or intelligence to being a celebrity or a movie star.
Right.
And it's gotten so misconstrued, and I just look at this and I say, that's where the systematic racism is.
Right.
Look at the NFL and the NBA and everything. Okay, now these people will let you say what you want. You can have your Black Lives Matter plastered across your basketball court. You can have your kneeling at the national anthem.
Yes, your protest during the anthem.
Because you're making us a lot of money. But let's not forget, you're still owned by me.
Yes.
And
that's
therefore
right.
You're still on the plantation. You're just living in a better house.
And John, that's a perfect example, because that is not just restricted to players of color, but now it's infringed on the players and the people in general, their freedom of speech rights. Right. So if you'll recall, in the wake of the whole Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem protesting, if you had a Drew Brees type of person, who is the quarterback, you happen to mention the New Orleans Saints, right. Drew Brees came out on social media, and all he stated was he was against kneeling during the national anthem. Right. Right. And they crucified him, right. And he actually had to get on social media afterwards because his masters told him to, right. And apologize for his position on that issue. And
that is exactly the agenda here. The agenda is not to elevate anybody. It is to bring everybody down to the same level.
Absolutely.
It's the same concept of communism and socialism and Marxism, whatever you want to call it. It's not to elevate your socioeconomic standing. It's to bring everybody down to that lower standing, where the central right. planners, the oligarchs, can now tell you what you can do, because they're the ones that hold the purse strings.
Absolutely.
And so that's the big deception that people just have not grasped and got a handle around yet. Although people are beginning to see that, and now that's why we're we're seeing a conservative woke movement right now.
We absolutely are.
You know, and it's so counter to what the left has been doing here over the last couple of years in particular.
Right.
Since we had the riots and the Black Lives Matter has come to national acclaim for some reason. I still can't put my finger on that.
Right.
But anyway, so that's why, I think that's why we spend so much time on this show talking about these things and trying to talk about them in a way that is, I think, I like to use the word provocative. I like provoking reactions. I don't.
Right.
I think I've always believed in the biblical concept that there are only two types of being that God will concern himself with, and that's those that are hot and those that are cold.
Right.
Because either
Right.
one of those things, you can change the temperature. The lukewarm, the people in the middle that will never make a decision, will allow themselves to be pushed around just because they don't want to make waves and everything else. Well,
Right.
they're just going to get sucked up into the machine and tossed out anyway, somewhere down the line.
Right.
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 So that's just the nature of the beast right now. Joe, I wanted to spend some time, the time we have left, talking about the latest edition of the New American that came out on the COVID. We were bragging last month about the students that Save the Schools, but this one on COVID is even better.
Oh, it's
like
amazing.
It just keeps getting better. Do you want to take a moment and explain?
I'd love to. First of all, John, with regards to the critical race theory that we were talking about last time, and this myth, which is what it is, of systemic racism in the country. It's an absolute myth. The idea that there is systemic racism within the police departments of the country, absolute myth. And so this older issue of the New American magazine, this came out in October of 2020. This was also a special report.
This is when it was really at the forefront.
Absolutely. It's got a lot of information regarding that and the police departments and Black Lives Matter. And then, of course, the education report that you're referring to, that was absolutely phenomenal. That's the biggest issue of the year and needs to get into the hands of a lot of people in the education communities. But this issue here that just came out, of course, on the COVID, and namely the idea of the forced vaccinations. One of the great stories in here and articles is the main one actually that we got written by Dr. Lee Merritt. She's a phenomenal source, and she dedicated her experience and intelligence toward putting this great article together. And from what I understand, she's going to be doing more of them also for the New American.
I'm curious, just we're hearing now stories or rumors or murmurs, whatever's going on here, that we're going to be, we can expect people to come knocking at our door, asking us if we've been vaccinated. And I've been hearing, there's almost a whole movement forming now. How do we respond to this, when people come to our door? And Michael and I were talking on the way over here to the studio, and I said, well, I'll probably handle them the same way I handled the census workers. Because when I filled out the census, I just answered the first 3 questions. And they started, I was hammered by these guys for close to 2 years. Like every 3-4 months, somebody was showing up at my door, asking me, all the other questions on the census. And I kept telling them, it's none of your business.
That's right. You're not obligated to do that.
So I told Michael, I said, my response will be when they ask me if I've been vaccinated is I will neither confirm nor deny that I've ever had a vaccination, because it's none of your business.
Exactly.
And if you want to try to assert some kind of pressure on me, it's still not going to be any of your business, and I'm still not going to comply. What are you going to do to me?
Right.
What are you going to do to me? Okay. You're going to make me wear a mask everywhere I go? That ain't going to happen either. I've come to this place where it's like just total belligerence. It's like, you know what? If you're gonna lay this stuff on me, you better start giving me some evidence and some proof, not just some opinion.
That's what it boils down to, John.
And like we're dealing here in LA County with this health director, Barbara Ferrer, and I just found out the other day she's not even a medical doctor. Her degrees are in welfare. She's a social worker.
Yes, I heard that myself.
And this woman is mandating health concerns
That's right.
when her whole mission statement, everything she talks about, is that equity is at the top of her list. I'm
It's
like, okay.
Absolutely
I don't
absurd,
even-
John.
Who were the idiots that got together and said this would be the woman that would good for
Right.
the job? Well, the idiots are obviously the board of supervisors here. They're the ones that appointed her. But
Right.
Anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. We do want to encourage you. We're coming to the end of our show here. We do want to encourage you to visit our respective organizations that Joe and I work in separately, and also collectively. JBS.org for John Birch Society, and EagleForumLAC.us for the LA County Eagle Forum, and EagleForumOC.com for those of you in Orange County. Right now, those are the most two active chapters in California. I could give you a whole list of them, but we're the ones we're the ones towing the load right now. So we're the ones that get the promotion. The rest of you have to catch up with us. So you can find us on EagleForumOC.com or EagleForumLAC.us or JBS.org. And I think that will conclude this edition of Sovereign Nation TV. You can find us out there on YouTube, and just go in and type in the search engine Sovereign Nation TV. I think we're now up on Rumble and Brighteon and Gab. So we're out there on several platforms.
Yep.
Just put in Sovereign Nation TV in the search engines and those respective sites, and you'll find us. So until next time, we just want to thank you for taking the time to watch us. God bless you, and keep on keeping on.
Long ago, up on Bunker Hill, they fought for freedom. Oh, yes, they did. Our founding fathers, they rose up to that call and rallied to the fight for liberty. We the people, one nation under God, fight for freedom and justice for all. We the people, one nation under God, must say